Hello everybody, my name is Ethan and I am a CFI in training. It's been a little while since I started my CFI training, and hopefully weather permitting, I will be able to take my CFI check ride next week. But as is the theme of the channel, let's see if I still got it. In today's video, we're going to be covering Task E National Airspace System in the Private Pilot Airman Certification Standards, or ACS. And in today's video, we're just going to go through K1 through K4, starting with we've got airspace classes and associated requirements and limitations, chart symbols, special use airspace, special flight rules areas, temporary flight restrictions in other airspace areas, and then special visual flight rules requirements. So, as far as the risk management section goes of the ACS, where flight planning or where airspace really becomes a big thing and a big risk is in flight planning. So there's different airspaces, which we'll talk about here pretty soon, that maybe we're not allowed to go through, or we're not allowed to go through at certain times, or it requires more training for us to fly through, or us to be certificated a certain way to fly into it. And it's important when we're flight planning, when we look at a VFR sectional, to be able to recognize those areas and then be able to understand the rules that surround them. So be able to identify them, understand where to get information on them, and be able to understand what kind of decision making we should make around those things, whether we want to fly around it or fly over it if it's not very high, or under it, whatever it may be. So in today's video, we're going to talk about all those things, and I'm just going to start off with K4, Special Visual Flight Rules, or Special VFR requirements. So when we're flying in Visual Flight Rules, VFR, which we do as a private pilot, which means not that there's no clouds, but we're not allowed to fly through clouds. We have different separations. So not only do we have a minimum amount of visibility that we need, but we also need to have a specific separation away from clouds, whether that be a feet increment horizontal from the clouds, below the clouds, or above the clouds. And we will talk about those later. But in special VFR, it's written out that we need to get a specific clearance from air traffic control to get a special VFR. And then with special VFR, we have to have 1 statute mile of visibility, and we have to remain clear of clouds, which just means we're not flying through any clouds. That doesn't mean, like, we could be 10 feet away from the clouds, but we just need to be clear of them. This cannot be done at night if you don't have an instrument rating, because it can be considered a little bit dangerous. That's more what we would call the scud running, where the weather is kind of a little crappy, but we want to get through, be able to fly VFR just to get from one spot to the next. That's a short distance. Let's say I went from a satellite airport to a main airport, or traveled only 10 miles or something. That's where we would want to pick up a special flight or a special VFR clearance. So next, we'll talk about the airspace classes and associated requirements and limitations. So with airspace, as a private pilot, we need to concern ourselves with 2 aspects of it. We not only need to be able to concern ourselves with looking at a VFR sectional and being able to recognize what airspace is what. So looking at it from the top-down view, like a map, like we were a satellite in the air looking down at it. But we also need to be able to understand it from a horizontal view. We want to be able to look at it from the side and see how high it goes and how wide it is and everything like that. So that's what we're going to concern ourselves with here. We'll first talk through what each airspace looks like on the VFR sectional, and then we'll go through what it looks like on this picture right here and discuss what requirements there are with it. So starting off with the classes, we can first start off with Class A airspace. So Class A airspace, that is the airspace, if we look at this picture right here, from flight level 180, or 18,000 feet, all the way up to 60,000 feet, or flight level 600. The reason that we can't see Class A airspace on a VFR sectional is because a VFR sectional doesn't go that high. A VFR sectional actually only goes up to 17,999 feet. So Class A airspace, it's got a couple of different rules that don't really apply to us as private pilots, because we're just not quite yet certificated or going to be flying any planes that are able to go up that high. But starting off with that, we must be, so we have no VFR minimum weather. So the reason that is because we need to be on an IFR flight plan, or instrument flight rules flight plan. This means that we need to have filed a flight plan with air traffic control to be able to be cleared up to 18,000 feet or above. And with that, we'll be able to fly in clouds. So we'll be in a plane that is certificated to fly in clouds, as well as, be certificated ourselves to fly in clouds. So because of that, you also have to have an instrument rating. So as far as the required equipment goes, we have ADS-B out, which we talked about in a past video, just broadcasting our position and our altitude and our call sign and our speed. We need to have two-way communications, so we need to be contacting air traffic control, be able to hear them and transmit to them. We need to have a mode C transponder for our equipment. And then above flight level 240, we have to have a suitable DME or RNAV equipment system so that we can get good enough distance measuring and be able to, navigate from one spot to the next. And then our maximum speed in Class A is Mach 0.99, so just below the speed of sound. We can go all the way up to whatever that speed is, just below the speed of sound, but we can't go quicker than that. So the next airspace is Class B airspace. So if I get on a VFR sectional and I look over right here, I am on the St. Louis sectional, which covers part of Missouri, part of Indiana, part of Ohio. We can see a Class B airspace in Cincinnati, CVG Airport. So we can tell that it's Class B because, for one, we see it's a lot bigger. We can just tell that. But we also see that there's this blue line. It's a blue solid line. So we see this blue line, this blue line, this blue line. So from the top view, we can see there's a lot of different layers to it. But then if we focus on that side view, like we talked about before, we can then look and see that, okay, it's what's called an upside down wedding cake. So if you imagine what a wedding cake looks like and then you flip it upside down, you see it's got an airspace down near the airport, and then as you get higher and higher, it widens out. And that's because typically in a Class B airport, there is going to be a lot more traffic, higher speed traffic, airlines, things like that. So they need to have a further coverage, a further jurisdiction to be able to bring in all the traffic that's going to be flying into said airport. So we think about it as a upside down wedding cake. So with that, you can see on this chart, in certain areas, the top of it is 10,000 feet. When you have a line like that, the altitude below it is the bottom half of it, or the bottommost portion of that airspace, and the number above it is the highest. So from here, in this specific circle, it looks like it goes from 10,000 feet at the very top of it down to 2,100 feet at the very bottom, or this section, 10,000 at the very top, 3,500 at the very bottom. So if I was flying at, let's say, 3,000 feet, I technically would not be in that Class B airspace if I was in this area right here. Or here, if I was below 5,000 feet, I technically would not be in this Class B airspace, as well as if I was above 10,000 feet, I would not be within this airspace. So now that we have this up top view of this blue solid line, we saw from the side view that it looks like an upside down wedding cake, we can then look to the requirements. So Class B, the VFR minimum requirements are 3 statute miles and clear of clouds. The equipment requirements are same as Class A. You have ADS-B out, two-way communications, mode C transponder, but you also have to have a clearance into the airspace. So air traffic control will be contacting you, and they say your call sign, November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you are cleared into the airspace. And then our max speed, we have 250 knots within the airspace. And then we have 200 knots below the shelf or in a VFR corridor. So what do we mean by shelf? Well, when we look at this and we see these different parts of the wedding cake, this is a shelf right here, and this is a shelf. So if my plane was somewhere around in this area, my max speed would be 200 knots. But if I was inside the airspace, the max speed would be 250. So the things that we also need to be concerned with Class B is just its dimensions. So Class B airspaces are tailored to their specific airport because, again, they have a lot of different traffic that's coming in there. So it's specific to that airport, but typically the very top of it is about 10,000 feet MSL. And every Class B airspace as well will have what's called this Mode C veil. You'll see Mode C and ADS-B out 30 nautical miles right there. So this little line, even if I'm not within the airspace, if let's say my plane is right here, even if I'm right there, I still have to have both Mode C and ADS-B out, because again, a lot of traffic going in. Even if I'm a small traffic guy right here flying around, they want to be able to tell where I'm at accurately. So if I'm within this 30 nautical mile Mode C veil, I need to have that equipment still. So next, after Class B airspace, we have Class C airspace, Class Charlie. So Class Charlie airspace is a solid magenta line. And again, with this, you saw that there's one circle, two circle, but that looks kind of like a very strange looking circle. And then a third one that also looks like, it kind of looks like a Beyblade from above. But when you get over here, it's a lot more uniform. It's just two circles, two magenta circles. So with that, our Class C airspace, Class Charlie, it's for those airports that are still big airports. Like this is Indianapolis International Airport, still a big airport, but just not as much of a demand for traffic as, let's say, your Class Bravo airports. So with a Class Charlie airspace, we can then look over here and see, yep, it's just a little smaller. It's got 2 levels to it, not 3 like Class B does. So there's only one shelf right here. And then also, if I look now at my equipment, we'll see that they're a little bit different. So my minimum weather that I need to have is 3152. So this is just what the memory aid is 3152. I'll describe it here right now. So 3152, you have 3 statute miles of visibility. You have 1,000 feet above clouds, 500 feet below clouds, and 2,000 feet horizontally from clouds. So that's the clearance that I need to maintain away from any clouds when I'm within that airspace. So you may be wondering, how do I tell that? How do I tell, okay, I'm exactly 2,000 feet or more away from this cloud? There's not a really good way to tell that. It's more just I'm trying to be safe, so I'm going to be as conservative as I can away from this cloud while I'm within this airspace. Because again, there's still a good bit of traffic in a Class Charlie airspace, so I want to be able to see everything, so I want to stay away from those clouds so that I can see any traffic that may be around me. As far as equipment goes, we need to have that ADS-B out, 2-way communications, and Mode C transponder, same as Class A and B, except for Class C, you don't require a clearance. You just have to have your call sign be said. So again, they don't need to say you're cleared into the airspace, but they will say November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then give you instructions. As soon as you hear your call sign, you're good to go. And the maximum speeds, this one gets a little bit more difficult to remember. So we have 250 knots within the airspace and 200 knots below the shelf of the airspace. So again, below the shelf means if I'm under this area right here. But then it gets a little bit harder to remember because we have this section where we also have to be 200 knots, and that's inside this yellow section. So from 4 nautical miles radius of the airport up to 2,500 feet, we have to be 200 knots in this area. And that's just important to remember because, again, this is a speed restriction. You can get in trouble if you go quicker than that. And then just looking at these dimensions of this airspace, your typical Class Charlie airport, this bottom section will be 5 nautical miles radius out from the airport. This first section of the shelf will go up to 1,200 feet AGL. And then this second section, that's 10 nautical miles, will go from 1,200 AGL up to 4,000 feet AGL. But again, remembering that our speed restriction is also inside this little yellow rectangle of 4 nautical miles up to 2,500 feet, we need to have 200 knots on our speed. One important thing that I did forget with Class Bravo airspace is us as private pilots. If, let's say, I'm practicing to become a private pilot, I'm a student pilot, I am not able to go into a Class Bravo airspace unless if I have a endorsement from my flight instructor. So unless I have an endorsement from my flight instructor, I am not good to go into a Class Bravo airspace by myself. But even with that, there's a list, and I'm getting this from AIM Chapter 3, 2.3. In Class B airspaces, there's a few that are just big ones that not any single student pilot is allowed to go into. So of that list, we have Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland, Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, Boston Logan Airport, Chicago O'Hare, Dallas Fort Worth, and a few others. And those are in our AIM. Chapter 3 of the AIM is all covering airspace. Everything that we have in this video will be outside of the AIM. But it's just important to remember that for Class B, certain airports we're just not going to be able to go into as a student pilot, and other ones, if we want to go into, we will have to be endorsed. So after talking about Class Charlie airspace, next we can talk about Class Delta. So now, at Class Delta, I can transition over to Terre Haute Airport in Terre Haute, Indiana. We can tell it's a Class Delta airport because it's one singular circle, and it's got blue dashed lines. That is a teller for Class Delta. That's that overhead view that we'll see on our VFR sectional chart. So from there, if I look at the side view of it, Class Delta, again, we can just see right here, just a nice little cylinder, pretty easy to remember. With Class Delta airspace, again, we have 3,152 as our VFR minimum. So if we're going to be inside the airspace, we got to have 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above clouds, 500 below, and 2,000 feet horizontal. The equipment, all that we need is to have two-way communications. We don't have to have ADS-B out or a Mode C transponder. We just have to contact air traffic control to get into the airspace. And then the maximum speed is 250 knots within the airspace, but 200 when we're in that little yellow area that we talked about before. So within 4 nautical miles of the airport up to 2,500 feet, we have to be 200 knots inside this area, but anytime outside of that, we can be up to 250. Now, what you can run into trouble with that is Class D airspace only goes up to 2,500 AGL, and the radius of it ranges anywhere from 4 to 8 nautical miles. So if it's a 5 nautical mile radius for the airport, I don't want to test my luck and fly at 250 for 1 mile and try and slow down to 200 by the time that I get within that. So I would just be safe rather than sorry with that. But that is Class Delta airspace. From there, we can then talk about Class Echo and Class Golf. So this is where it gets a little bit harder because you see there's Class Echo and it's just like everywhere else. And then Class Golf, there's a bunch of different parts that it can be. 1,200 AGL, 700 AGL, all that. So what I will say, Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo airspaces. Those 4 are what we call controlled airspaces. So air traffic control can give you services in all of them. So they're required in Class B or Class Bravo, Charlie, and Echo. Or Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. Sorry. In those 3, you're required to have two-way communications with air traffic control. But in Class Echo, it's all whether or not you want to be helped by air traffic control or not. Because I can be flying around outside of these airspaces as long as I'm in Class Echo. I don't have to be talking to air traffic control if I don't want to. So it's all up to us to participate in that if we want, and those services are there, workload permitting for a lot of air traffic controllers. So with airspace in Class Echo, we can see it's just everywhere else. So there's no, on this sectional, there's no thing that shows us, oh, this specific spot is Class Echo. We just know that it goes from wherever the underlying airspace is, whether that be Class Delta or Class Golf, all the way up to 17,999 feet, right below where it turns into Class A airspace. So it just fills in the gaps. So Class Echo airspace, there's some VFR minimums. If we're below 10,000, it's 3,152, just like we said with Charlie and Delta. But if we're above 10,000, it's 5,111, so 5 statute miles of visibility. 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below clouds, and 1 mile horizontally from clouds. There's no required equipment for Class Echo. And then we want to be at 250 knots below 10,000 on the speed and Mach 0.99 on the speed when we're above 10,000 feet. Lastly, we have Class Golf. And Class Golf is one that is always going from the surface to 700 feet. It's always going to at least 700 feet everywhere. So from the ground all the way up to 700 feet, we're always going to have Class Golf. But you'll see all these different magenta, kind of like big, fatter magenta circles. And that right there is indicating that Class Golf airspace is going from the surface up to 12 from the surface up to 700 feet. So I said that incorrectly. So Class Golf airspace is always going up to 1200, and then this means Class E goes down to 700 feet. Excuse me. And from there, that's where that Class Golf begins. So again, we can see on this airspace chart, it can go up to 700, it can go up to 1200, all the way up to 14,500 MSL in mountainous areas. But that's what we're worried about with Class Golf. So for Class Golf, we have now no equipment requirements, no we have no equipment requirements, and then we have the same maximum speeds as Class Echo airspace. So 250 knots below 10,000, Mach 0.99 above 10,000. And then for that, if we're above 10,000 feet on the VFR minimums, we have 5 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 above and below clouds, and 1 mile horizontal from clouds. And then it gets a little bit harder to remember, which I'll put a link in the description of a video that really helped me remember Class Golf. Class Golf VFR minimums. But we have in the daytime above 1,200 feet and below 10,000 feet, 152, so 1 statute mile of visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, and 2,000 feet horizontal. And then below 1,200 feet AGL, we have 1 statute mile clear of clouds. And then at night, no matter if it's below 1,200 AGL or above 1,200 AGL, we want 3,152, which is the same as Charlie and Delta. So 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 feet horizontal. So that is Class Golf. And like we see here, it's just anywhere around. And Class Golf is what we call uncontrolled airspace, so air traffic control is not controlling it. We can see non-towered airport with no instrument approach. There's no need for air traffic control to be out there, so that is where our airspace, our Class G airspace is going to be at, is our smaller airports. So it's really important to remember, and like you just saw earlier, I got a little confused when I was presenting this with the different airspaces. But we have on our VFR sectional, we have this little legend. So this goes into the chart symbols section of our legend. In this, it just tells us all the different airspaces, all of what they look like. So Class B is that blue line. Class C airspace is the magenta line. D is the dashed blue one. Class E airspace with floor 700 feet above surface that laterally abuts Class G. So that means Class G to 700 looks like that. Class E airspace with floor at 1,200 feet or greater is that blue one. So that is what that looks like. So with that, it's always just any chart symbol you can look at and be confused at. You can just come over here and look at what it is. And it's important to know what these are, but it's also important to know where to find it if you're ever confused. So there's just a lot of different legends here. And then you can also look up, they have a chart symbology legend, a big one, Aeronautical Chart User's Guide, which I think is now discontinued, but they still have it in the FAA publications, that has a lot of this stuff just put out there, and you can search it up if you ever have any questions about any of that, and I'll link that in the description. But that is our airspace, our main classes of airspace. So with that, we can now talk about the last point, which is special use airspace, special flight rules areas, temporary flight restrictions, and other use or other airspace areas. So now from here, we can see there's two different things. So special use airspace, I use the memory aid of MCPRON. So that stands for military operations area, controlled firing area, prohibited area, restricted area, alert area, warning area, and national security area. So a little bit of information about all of these. A military operations area, it's just a big spot that shows you that, hey, the military is operating in this specific area, like this, Red Hills MOA. You can see it, it's kind of like a red comb. And you can actually go and get more information on this. If I were to look up the MOA name right here and see, I think it was the Red Hills MOA. So it's at 6,000 feet. Its time of use is from 800 to 2200. The controlling agency is in Indianapolis Center, and you can call them on 132.2. So anytime that you have any special use airspace that's on this chart, you can find information about it over here. But with a military operations area like that Red Hills MOA that we were just looking at, which I don't know if I'll be able to find it again, but there it is. Anytime that we have a military operations area, it's to separate instrument flight rules IFR traffic from military traffic. They're operating in that area. So technically VFR traffic can fly through them at any time, but you just want to be extremely cautious. And oftentimes they can be higher up, so if you just fly under them, that's also fine, but just be cautious as you're flying through an MOA. So next one, we have controlled firing area, which a controlled firing area you will never see charted on a sectional chart because it's a controlled firing area. It's some sort of military operation where they're firing something, but it's controlled, so if they ever see that an aircraft is coming, they will stop their firing. Next, we have prohibited area, which is something that an aircraft cannot fly through. And a prohibited area will be a blue comb circle like we saw with the MOA, which I do not know. Yeah, here's DC's prohibited area. You can see all this. So aircraft are not allowed to fly inside this area, except there's a little bit of special rules which we'll talk about with DC because there is this airport inside of that. But there are prohibited areas that you just cannot fly through. And those are established for national security or welfare or whatever that may be. Then we have restricted areas, which restricted areas, here's one right here, also blue comb, but it'll say R in it. So this is R3401B, R3401A. So flight through this is restricted at certain times. Again, I can check on that legend over here to get information about it. So let's say if I'm looking for restricted areas, all R3401A, it goes up to 40,000 feet, and it's continuous from 1st of May to 30th September. So these restricted areas we're not allowed to fly through during their active times. So that's where we would look, see when they're active, and be like, hey, are we good to fly through this or not? So that is what we focus on there. And we have to be approved by the controlling agency if we want to fly through it. So with that, if I wanted to fly through that, I would have to contact them. They would have to give me the okay before I could fly through that. Next, we have an alert area, which an alert area, it is in purple typically, and it just says alert area, and that's just for a high volume of training aircraft in an area. You just gotta be alert when you're flying through it. That's the main thing. There's no special rules with it. Just be extra alert as you're out there. Then we have warning areas, which extend 3 nautical miles out from the coast. And these warning areas, Here's a good example of one down here. It's just for, again, military hazardous activities. They could possibly be hazardous to us. You don't have to have any permission to fly through them. You just want to be cognizant of whatever's going on there. So then from there, we have the national security areas, and those are just kind of like these blocky dashed lines. I don't think there's one on the sectional that I have found before in the St. Louis sectional, but it's essentially you're asked to voluntarily not fly over this national security area, whatever it may be, and flight may be temporarily prohibited whenever they need, but you're just asked not to fly through it. It's not the biggest deal if you do end up flying through it. But then lastly, for our other use airspace, we have SWAT, which we remember: Special Flight Rules Area, Wilderness Area, ADIZ, TURSA, TFR. So Special Flight Rules Area, a very common one is DC, Washington, D.C. You need to have special training to be able to fly in that area, or also over the Grand Canyon is another one. You have to have special training to be able to fly there. So there's just special flight rules in that area. The next we have is a wilderness area. That looks very similar to just like this. This is a wilderness area right here. Charles Dean Wilderness Area. Pilots are just asked to not fly any lower than 2,000 feet AGL above these areas. You really can't get in trouble if you fly lower, but you can. I have heard that some people can be fined for that if there was some guy out there, like a park ranger, that reported you. You could get fined for that. So just stay above 2,000 feet so you don't disturb the wildlife. Next, we have Air Defense Identification Zone, which is just extending off of the coast at all borders. And other than our border with Canada, we have the ADIZ on all other sides. So the West Coast, East Coast, and then with Mexico. And aircraft just need to be identified. It's the Air Defense Identification Zone. We need to identify those aircraft, and they have to be on a VFR flight plan, or what's called, or a defense VFR flight plan, or an IFR flight plan, and you got to have ADSB to fly through that area. Then we have a terminal radar service area, which essentially is just a class Delta airspace that's got better ATC facilities, so like a class Charlie ATC facility. That's essentially all that it is. You're asked to participate in it because it's good for their training and things like that. And then lastly, we have temporary flight restrictions, which are just that. I mean, flight is temporarily restricted for different things, whether it be the president is in town, or there's air shows, or the Super Bowl is going on. Those you can't find on a VFR sectional. You'd have to look it up. It would be in NOTAMs or things like that. And it can be flown through on a temporary flight restriction if you have prior permission from whoever the controlling agency is. You would get that information again from the publication that's sent out from. But yeah, that is all of our airspace. I know that was a very quick crash course, so if you have any questions, you can leave those in the comments. And thank you very much for watching.